Hi everyone, I wanted to take a chance to run through the answers to our final exam because I think that's always important to let you know. Likewise, I wanted to talk a little bit about the grades as they're being posted. I am just now getting ready to start the papers after lunch because I've had a few makeup exams and one or two people fixing some various assignments that they needed to address for me. So you should be seeing your daily grades and you should be able to see your final exam grades now. In terms of daily grades, they hit the entire gamut. Some are really high. I think our highest was 114 from a student who got all of the extra credit correct and things like that, and to very, very low. Um, Again, the daily grade comes from all of the reading quizzes. So missing one, and or maybe doing very poorly on one, um, that could hurt. The blog was offered as a way of helping to bring that up, and some of you have really great blogs, and some of you have blogs in which you left out a few assignments, and again, those small assignments, they add up. So the way that the blogs are counted is that if you didn't do one, it was a 0. If you did one, but you only did a sentence or two, that's, a 1. And if you did a really excellent job, you got a 2. We had lots and lots of 2s, but we also had a lot of 0s. So um, hopefully that helps you understand. You know how much effort you put into your daily homework and your daily in-class prep. So that's where that comes from. All right, let's run through the literature final here. And again, we had some grades that dipped, and we had some grades that moved up. And we had some of you that hit the exact same grade you had from the midterm, which I think is mildly impressive. So very well done there. And I'm just going to run through the answers so that you both see what the correct answer was and understand some of the grading on the more subjective portions. So, starting with just the multiple choice, let's run through. Number 1, what word means a fictitious character through which the poem is filtered? That is the poem's persona. Number 2, which term means the literal or dictionary meaning? That is the denotation. Number 3, which term refers to grouping of lines, often with specific rhyme scheme or meter? That is a stanza. Number 4, which term means a short poem expressing the thoughts of a single speaker, typically put in first person? That is a lyric poem. A number of folks put dramatic monologue. The key here is that it says typically in first person, but if it is a monologue, it would always be in first person. A lyric poem is a much broader category that we talked about at the start of the poetry section. Number 5, which word means a poem's overall structure or shape? That is a form. I purposely put this question in here to try to help you with a later question in the short answer section. Same for number 6, which term means pattern of end rhymes, typically shared by stanzas throughout a poem, and that is the rhyme scheme. Again, that's something that reappears in the short answer section. Number 7, which term is the most common stanzaic form? That's the quatrain. Number 8, which poem contains 14 lines in iambic pentameter? That's the sonnet. Number 9, which term refers to the audience's sense of relief rather than hopelessness? That is catharsis. That comes from our initial discussion of drama and tragedy. Number 10, which term refers to the spectators in the yard? Those are the groundlings. Number 11, which term refers to a speech directed only to the audience? That is an aside. Again, I was trying to help you in case you chose the Elizabethan discussion. An aside is a convention of Elizabethan performance, as is the soliloquy that I also included there. 12, which poem describes the competitive nature of young males? That is rite of passage. Which poem describes a goat-footed balloon man? Is unjust. Number 14, which poem implies that the speaker has murdered his wife? That is My Last Duchess. Number 15, which poem reflects on the speaker's father? That's Those Winter Sundays. 16, who wrote Fire and Ice? Would be Robert Frost. 17, which poem celebrates negative perceptions of women? That's Her Kind. 18, which poem concludes, and since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs? That's Out Out, in which the little boy dies and the family moves on. Number 19, which poem suggests the speaker loves his partner without unrealistic praise? That's My Mistress's Eyes. 20, which poem uses soap in order to cleanse the speaker's attempt to pass? That's White Lies. 21, which writer may have died on the same date as his birthday? That is Shakespeare. This is one version of the exam had you read Oedipus. So for 22, I have a different question. Which text constantly resets, offering the characters another opportunity to begin? And the answer was A, that was Sure Thing. For 23, which character has a donkey's head? That is Nick Bottom. For 24, again, we had a different question, as you did not read Oedipus. 24, which poem concludes with the image of a sailor dreaming of catching tigers in red weather? That is The Disillusionment of 10 O'Clock. That was a D. And 25, which character states, Lord, what fools these mortals be? That is Puck from Midsummer Night's Dream. Moving into the short answer questions, I did try in multiple ways, both speaking to you as the class and within the instructions here. In fact, these are even older instructions that you see on the screen now. What you all have reads somewhat differently. What type of poem is shown below? What conventions are typical of this closed form? So those of you who told me it was free verse, the answer was already in the question. I told you it was a closed form. You know, some of you put didactic, some of you put lyric. Pardon me. And for those of you who could tell me what a didactic or a lyric was, I gave you some credit. But if you look at this poem in its simplest structure, it is a 3-line poem, which some of you identified as a tercet, so you got a little bit of credit there too. But it's a haiku with a 5-7-5 syllable structure that captures a particular moment. Now, it is a little tricky in that it doesn't have like an Asian theme, but since we read dog haiku, you know, it's not that big a trick. So I told you it wasn't free verse, or free form rather. I did tell you in the question that it is closed. So it's a haiku with 5-7-5, 3 lines. You know. Again, I tried to give you the definition of a rhyme scheme earlier, and a lot of you did very well on this particular one. Although there is a little bit of a catch here. It is A, B, C, 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 D. So these two rhyme. We switch, these two rhyme. And then we have 3 here that rhyme with one another. Now some of you put A, B, A, B, and you still got some credit. However, linguistically, moan and flown, because of the N makes a sound. It changes the sound of the word. So moan and flown, although their vowels rhyme with snow and crow, they still don't have the N at the end, and the N is a different sound, so you do want to try to, in the rhyme scheme, identify that, because that's a more accurate description. So you didn't lose all the points, but you, if you put A for all these 3, but you lost a point or 2. What is connotation? You know, many of you put it's the meaning beyond the literal definition. That's true. A number of you came up with various reasons for why it's useful. You know, poems tend to be brief. They need to convey information very quickly. These are evocative. They explain, so on, so forth. And, you know, some of you said it's what makes it poetic, and, you know, that also works for me. Again, you did not have this question because we didn't read drama, so instead I asked, what are some attributes of a one-act play? And in the question, I said, besides merely consisting of one act. And some of you actually put that back in. In other words, I'm telling you in the instructions that that's not the answer that is acceptable. You know, yes, they are brief. They do tend to be of one act, and you know, some of you gave me multiple versions of that answer. But it's something like continuous action, fewer characters, some action occurs off scene, and typically there's a set that, or a setting that you don't really deviate from. So those are a few of those conventions that we were looking at, and some of you went really in depth, which is great. So that was an interesting kind of question to see how you responded. But we covered 2-1 acts, so you should be able to talk about them and recognize one. Number 5 here, again, we would have talked about amphitheaters in the past, but we did not get to do Oedipus, so instead I spoke specifically about the Globe Theater one day. If you put that it was round, it's actually octagonal, but I didn't take off for that, obviously, because I didn't use that word. It does have open air seating. It has the yard, the pit, the thrust stage, the tiring house. It has elevated seating for those who pay more with cushions. Some of you talked about various conventions related to the performance itself, but again, here we're just looking at the structure of the theater. Let's see what else we've got here. These are slightly different again from the questions that you saw. Do I have that version of the exam? Oh, I do. Okay. Here's your exam. This first one is really a rehash of a question I asked you on the first exam. Many of you chose it, and you did very well by and large, except for those of you who use short stories. We've already tested you on short stories, and here I already in the instructions specifically say you may use poems or plays. Short stories is not an option. So a lot of you did well. If you lost points here, it's because, again, some of you fall back on just summarizing rather than telling me how the elements of that poem or play build that theme. And that's the key. That's where the real sophisticated analysis comes from. If you can talk about, or you would use the phrase, the figurative language in White Lies supports this idea of a hybrid figure, but then you wouldn't tell me what metaphors or similes were in there, what symbols were in there. So that's where people started to kind of falter a little bit. Number 2, I asked about the Renaissance era, conventions of performance. So some of you chose this option and talked about the bit with the dog, or battles, or feasts, or costumes that were elaborate, not much set. Very few of you picked up on the aside and the soliloquy, which are really kind of pivotal to that era, so please bear that in mind. But the idea of the interaction with the crowd is certainly very important. And a few brave souls went for number 3. Some of you did very well. Some of you glossed on tragedy, and I could see that you really didn't recall the conventions of it. But you want to remember that tragedy almost always follows somebody who's a great man or a great figure who is at the height of their fortune, and they will fall. It is not necessary for the protagonist to die, though he often does. Sometimes not dying is more tragic than dying. So things of that nature were what we're looking for in tragedy. And of course, comedy is lighthearted. We never really fear for them, and so forth. The number one problem that I had with this essay was the folks who chose to use Oedipus Rex. Not one of you got the right author, but all of you put that it was Shakespeare who wrote it. And Shakespeare was not even alive when Oedipus Rex was first conceived, because it's from classical Greece, and it was written by Sophocles. So you really want to be aware that Shakespeare is not the only playwright, and certainly, he was certainly familiar, though, with Oedipus Rex and Sophocles' work. So that would be a caution from me to you to as a class, bring out of this that Sophocles wrote Oedipus Rex, though Shakespeare did write many excellent tragedies, and I'll be teaching a course on the tragedies in the spring, should you be interested. So yes, so that's, this is a long video, and I don't mean it to be. Alright, I will likely post something come tomorrow about the final papers, but I hope you all are having a nice day, and I will see you on the other side.